But here we are.
Hello from the European House in Berlin. This is Jörg Bojan, representative of the European Commission, with Jana Puljerin, the head of office of ECFR here in Germany. And we have come here together with the Secretary General of the External Action Service, Stefano Sannino. He's not here in Berlin, unfortunately, but in Brussels in his office at the Rond-Point Schuman. And we wanted to take this opportunity to introduce him here to Germany. He has taken office as Secretary General of the External Action Service in January. He might be known to some of you from his previous positions because he had quite a few. He's kind of the embodiment of the Team Europe approach, one might say so. So now in the External Action Service, already there since 1 year, when High Representative Vice President Borrell asked him there as a Deputy Secretary General. But he has also served in the Commission in previous positions. He was Director General for Enlargement. He was Deputy Director General for DG Relex in those ancient golden days when it still existed. And he was the diplomatic advisor to President Romano Prodi in the European Commission. And here I come to his link to his national career, because as I said, Team Europe means commitment to EU functions, but also national diplomatic functions. He was also diplomatic advisor to Romano Prodi when he was a prime minister. And Stefano held a number of senior diplomatic positions, including ambassadorial ones in the Italian service. And I think the most important diplomatic job in any diplomatic service for an EU member state, he was the permanent representative to Brussels. Now, please, nobody complains who was permanent representative to New York. I think the one to Brussels is more important. And
Indeed.
just to, I think so. And just to show you that he's not only an EU animal, he even served as OSCE head of office in Belgrade in the early 2000s. So I think Stefano has a really broad view of all that is foreign policy. I don't, so I rather keep quiet. I just served a little bit in delegation, but now here in Berlin, and I rather pass the floor to Jana Puljerin, who is a real foreign policy animal. Jana.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Good day to Berlin. Good day to all of our listeners. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you, Mr. Sannino, and to ask you some questions. I also encourage our people in the Zoom call and in the live stream to ask their questions via the Q&A function. I have my computer here and I'll see your questions and ask them accordingly. So please shoot whenever something comes to your head. But for now, I would like to kick off this discussion with my first question. So Stefano, you have taken office at a time when the challenges for European foreign policy are growing basically by the day. We see increasing great power rivalry, we see zero-sum thinking, and all this is increasingly calling into question basically the EU's model of doing foreign policy, which is based on multilateralism and interdependence. So if the EU does not want to be a plaything, but a player in this world, it must surely become more vigorous and more united on the global stage. At the same time, I think recent years have shown that EU member states have found it increasingly difficult basically to find European compromises and to solve their differences and to come to an agreement. And so I think there is a real gap between basically all the challenges in foreign policy the EU is facing and the lowest common denominator, which has been the result of previous actions too often. So in which way do you think the EAS could help to bridge that gap, to make European foreign policy more effective, and what could be your personal contribution in achieving this goal?
Well, many things at a time. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks for having me with you. I mean, the CFR is very close to my heart, so it's I feel like at home. I mean, with you. many things in your questions, and maybe let me say a couple of words on the overall framework and on the situation that has been generated in the last few years, and then go to the point of the EIS role and how we can manage to help in this process. It is true that we have been living within the European Union since a number of years in a situation of permanent crisis. We have gone, I would say, since 2006, more or less, from one crisis to another. It was the financial, it was also the security in terms of the waves of terrorist attacks. Then we have had the migratory crisis, and then we have gone through Brexit, and then it has been COVID. So essentially, we are in a crisis mode since many, many years, and this has generated a sort of tension on the system that we have to take into account. For good or for bad, I mean, the system, the EU system, is a system that, because of its own characteristics, many member state institutions and so on, it's slower than in its capacity of reaction, and so it has been tested against this situation of polycrisis that we have gone through. Among these crises, certainly is the one that you were mentioning about the member states, but I would say not only member states, in a sort of nationalist attitude on a number of countries. When you are in a crisis, sometimes you have a feeling that if you're close, that if you are, let's say, looking more introvert, if you're looking at yourself, you are more capable of solving a number of problems because you address them in a better way. Which I think is, to be very honest, not because I'm sitting in this position or because I've spent most of my life working with and within the European Union. It's a sort of understandable, but not necessarily a right instinct and a right thing to do, because the bigger the crisis is, the more complex it is, the more you need others and you need the capacity to be together and to team up in order to have a good reaction and a capacity to move forward. And I would say that with all the difficulties, now I'm not trying to be indulgent with the European Union, but in spite of all the difficulties that we may have had, in a way we have managed to do things. And we have seen lately what has been done with Next Generation Europe, but also with all the limits with the policy on vaccines. This has been a way for the EU to stay united and to be able to face the problems. The crisis of multilateralism is not only linked to these problems, it's also linked, and we have to be, let's say, honest in this, with the positions that have been taken by a number of other relevant players and actors on the international scene. We have unfortunately witnessed it in the last few years, a sort of tension between multilateralism versus multipolarism, and this is something that is also not helped, let's say, our activity. The more polarized we are, and I'm speaking about again, not only within the European Union, but generally, the more polarized we are, the weaker we become. Because I mean, it's the fact that we are not having a place, a forum, rules that are applicable to everybody is generating a number of tensions. And it's not only necessarily the biggest and the strongest that wins, because sometimes you may win, but some other times you may lose. And I mean, and we measure strength in a different way nowadays, because we mention strength not only on the basis of the military power, of the economic power. You have so many other threats, hybrids that are coming in. You have the weaponization of a number of policies that has come into the picture, that it's very, very difficult to say that there is one country that is stronger than all the others. Then let's come to more to the European Union and to us. I think that first of all we need to be clear about which is the role of the EIS, but I would say of an EU foreign policy, because I mean it's what we are talking about essentially. And then we need to understand, and I think that we need to be clear in the fact that having an EU foreign policy does not mean that we are not having 27 foreign policies, because the two things need to coexist. Member states have not given up their role in foreign policy. We are still working at unanimity. We are still working for consensus at best, so with no position. So we are still working in a situation where, in order to decide on something, we will need to find a sort of common position. This common position does not mean necessarily the lowest common denominator. I think the two things are not the same. Common positions means, I think, and I like very much the expression that was used by Wolfgang Ischinger, is to put mettre l'église au milieu du village. That is to try to gain, to get, let's say, different points of view of different positions, and then find a common way forward. And this is not something negligible. I think that it's not something that we need to, to underestimate in terms of the work that we are doing, which is also very much our work. I mean, when you speak about the EIS, and I'm speaking more about what we do on a constant basis, we need to take into account the position of all the member states, and then trying to devise a way forward. Way forward, which is of, let's say, serving the collective interest, and this is also a way forward acceptable for our counterparts, because then it does not, let's say, the policy is not only find an agreement among ourselves, but then also being able to be effective with this position vis-a-vis the member, vis-a-vis the third countries. So it's a complex exercise. As I was saying, it's not necessarily rapid, in the sense that you cannot manage to find an agreement rapidly. Sometimes you must have sort of external shocks that are generating a moment of, let's say, acceleration in the process. That's really our role, to be, again, in a constant understanding of which are the things that we can do, how we can sell it, and take the opportunity of what is coming in. One thing is true of what you're saying is the fact that for quite some time we have seen and perceived ourselves as the force for good. So, I mean, our position and our, let's say, reaction was that of saying, there is a problem, and then we are coming in as payers. So we are coming into a finance reconstruction, we are coming into bring humanitarian aid. And again, this is a very good part of the story. I'm not saying that it's not relevant, it's not important, it is. But at the same time, we need to be also, and that's what we are, I think we are, we have come to this decision. We have to be also more assertive in terms of what we want to do and how we can implement an agenda which is our agenda, but which is also an agenda which is of interest for third countries.
Can I have a follow-up question precisely on this? Because basically your boss, Josep Borrell, has said that the EU needs to learn the language of power. And I have many sympathies for this expression, but I always struggle to understand what kind of power language that should be. Is it Chinese then? Does it mean that we maybe distribute money to African dictatorships without the strings attached, or should we use our economic power more vigorously, maybe for economic coercion, like the United States have done during the Trump administration? So how to bridge this kind of special characteristics of EU foreign policy, as you said, the do-gooders in the world, and then the language of power. What is that language then? How does that sound?
Well, it's the good that there is also one other element that I need to stress. We have been and we still are a standard setter. It's not irrelevant. And this is also the language of power. There are different ways of expressing power. It's not only the might of an army or what you are doing in imposing sanctions, to name a few, but it's also how you are projecting your vision, your views, your interests in a convincing manner. And I think that when we have in mind to speak the language of power is also this, that we do not shy away from doing as others do, of putting on the table which are our, let's say, our interests. I don't know, climate change is one of those, or the digital, for example, or data, or again, I think it's because we need to look at the foreign policy has become much more complex and articulated than it used to be before. It's not just, let's say, treaties and armies. It's more complex, and you can do a lot of harm. I don't know. Using masks, for example, during crisis, or
exporting not vaccines, or not exporting them.
I'm not saying this, you said it.
But maybe then more concretely on the role of the EAS. You have just celebrated your 10th anniversary, and it's time to take stock. So while at the one hand, I think we certainly see a lot of interaction in Brussels and a densely institutionalized system of foreign policy consultations and cooperations in Brussels. To the outside observers, in that particular case, me, looking at the EAS, I have the impression that it became less relevant than more relevant in the past. So when I think of Cathy Ashton and her role, she had some very important foreign policy portfolios that she owned. She played a major role in the Iran deal negotiations. She played a major role to broker a peace process between Serbia and Kosovo. She basically created or built the EAS from scratch. But under Mogherini, to me, but maybe I'm wrong, it seemed that she was basically shut out of all the big foreign policy portfolios, Russia, China. To what extent do you think Mr. Borrell was able to change this? And where concretely do you think is the special role for the EAS, the kind of playing field that the member states leave to the EAS for input?
Maybe I will start from the end, and then I will try to answer your previous questions. The EAS, in the way it has been created, and the agreement of the member states when it was created, was to put the EAS in a sort of balance between the member states on one hand and the Commission on the other hand. And we were given a sort of coordinating role, and I'm putting in quotation marks, but we were not giving, let's say, the control over the instruments. So we are coordinating instruments that we do not control. If we want to have missions and operations, we need the people and the assets that are coming from member states. If we want to do, let's say, less classical and more EU foreign policy, we need to turn to the European Commission, because it's there that there are the external dimension of the policies of the EU. So the difficulty of the EAS is to have, let's say, being between two constituencies. And what we need to be able to do is to, let's say, show and prove our added value and being able to convince both constituencies to make us play this double role. Otherwise, the risk is that we can, I'd say, either we can become a sort of 28th foreign ministry, which we are not, or that we can become another DG of the Commission, which we are not. And so our position and our way of being is defined, let's say, in this double way, what we can do, but also what we cannot do if we are not given the instrument to operate. With this, I'm not saying that we do not have any kind of responsibility and they have to stay idle and sit and wait if we are asked to do something or not, but we need also to create these conditions. So, I mean, we need to, every morning, we need to go out and earn our life, because we are not in institutions, because we are not a member state. So, I mean, I have a more complicated, a harder life than some of my colleagues, because let's say, I have to eat my salary every day. I mean, I have to eat to earn my place at the table on a daily basis. So this makes us, I mean, again, you can see it as a sort of weakness, or you can see also a sort of strength. Because if you are able to play on both sides, you can find your way through, and you can manage to do this kind of work. I beg to disagree on the fact that Mogherini had not done things or less visible things compared with Ashton. Iran, I think that is sort of shared success in the sense that it was started with Ashton, but it was completed by Mogherini. And I have to say that there was in all this a certain element of continuity, and I want to pay tribute to her, to Helga Schmidt, who has been the negotiator in all this process and the link between the two. Serbia, Kosovo. Depends on depends on many things. Let me put it this way: that at the time when the dialogue started, the enlargement perspective was slightly more consolidated than it is today. So, I mean, the success of a reaction depends also on the overall environment and circumstances in which you are working. So I certainly agree with you that it was a very important start, and that it was then going on a sort of lower during the Mogherini period. We are starting now again with Miroslav Lajčák, who is animating under the direction of Borrell this dialogue. But it was during Mogherini, for example, that we had two very important pieces of work which were done. The famous communication on China, where China was defined a partner, competitor, and a rival. So she defined, in a way, together with the member states, together with the Commission, together with all the actors, the new policy on China. And it was under Mogherini that the 5 principles were defined. And then again, it's the framework which is now still on which we are still working in our relation with Russia. So we need to take also these elements into account, and again consider always the balance on which we are working.
Coming back to the last point, the 5 principles and the Russia file. I have a question that came in by Vladimir Handel, who is with the Charles University in Prague. And he has a question which I think many had in mind when witnessing the recent visit of Mr. Borrell to Moscow. And I quote here, Mr. Borrell's visit to Moscow is seen as a political and professional failure. Also, we don't see much self-reflection on the side of Mr. Borrell or the European External Action Service. What went wrong? How can we conceive foreign powers as well as the EU member states? So basically the question is, so what went wrong? And my question, which I would add to this, is also, what are the lessons learned for the future? So after the visit, has this changed the thinking about Russia inside the EAS, or more broadly, also between the member states in the European institutions? So was there also some cleansing moment, maybe, which would be maybe also positive?
Look, I think that I would say if there is something that has been discussed at length and inside out, is the visit of Borrell to Moscow. So, I mean, in terms of self-reflection, I mean, we have done sort of very deep exercise in of self-reflection. We can, let's say, we can decide, and I think that very honestly also the High Representative did it, whether or not in the press conference he had to be more assertive in replying to the accusation of Lavrov. He has said, by the way, to a German paper, because it was in the Spiegel, where he said that at that moment, he thought that it would have not been useful for the overall relation with Russia to have this kind of reaction. We can argue whether or not this was the thing to do, but still, I think that I think that the only element on which we can speak about the visit was this public element, which was exploited by Lavrov to make his point on the relation with the European Union. What went wrong? I don't know if it's something went really wrong, in the sense that after the visit, this has generated a very unified position of the European Union vis-à-vis Russia. So I think that from that point of view, the scope of the visit, the reason for the visit was, on the one hand, to, let's say, make it clear to Russia our dissatisfaction for the way the Navalny case was being dealt with. And I think that it was done quite clearly, to the point that it generated this very strong reaction from Lavrov. And the second point was to check whether it was possible to create the conditions for a more constructive engagement with Russia on a number of files which are of common interest. And I mean, and they go from the environment files to JCPOA, for example, or the Arctic, and so on. The reaction was the one that we have seen. I mean, in a way, Russia does not believe in the EU track, believes in the bilateral track with a number of member states. They believe that somehow the EU is too much influenced by a number of factors, which is, let's say, one of the narrative which is very often told about the fact that there are different perceptions vis-à-vis Russia in the European Union. Certainly, I would say there are different histories, and there are different approaches of within the European Union when it comes with relation with Russia. But this does not mean, as I was saying before, that we have been unable to have had a consistent and coherent policy as European Union vis-à-vis Russia. And we have identified a number of principles, and we are now identified a number of, let's say, specific line of actions on which we are working on making clear our dissatisfaction with the way they are dealing with human rights, with the civic space in their country, with the way they are treating civil society. And we are saying it clearly with sanctions. And by the way, sanctions are approved by unanimity. So it's there is no country who is desolidarizing from that point of view. There is no country that is saying that the Navalny case has not been dealt in the wrong way. So, I mean, I think that from that point of view, it has to be, and it was generating a very strong reaction. For the first time, we were using this new instrument, which is the global human rights sanctions. The second area is the fact that we are all believing that it's very important to make a distinction between the government and the people. We think that I would say there is a very lively civil society in Russia, which is, let's say, and we see it from an everyday, and the people going in the street, keeping on protesting in spite of all this situation. And we want to continue working with this part of the country. We want to continue working with the Russian people. We want to be sure that, let's say, the attitude of Russia vis-à-vis its neighbors does not create problems for those countries who are willing to continue getting closer to the European Union, be it Ukraine or Georgia or Moldova. I mean, that's or others that would like to in the future. We want to continue working against disinformation and how Russia is using this tool in terms of hybrid threat. And we want to continue working with Russia on a number of files that are of common interest and where they have more cooperative approach. Again.
Thank you. Just to give you a heads up, I have now really numerous questions in the chat, and I want to squeeze as many in as possible.
Okay, I will try to be quick in the reply.
Yes, please. That was a slight subtle hint. There were numerous questions on China. The big question, I think, now for the European Union. I think until kind of maybe the last mid of last decade, I think the overarching assumption in the European Union still was that there was a possibility basically to work with China and then to see a country developing in more democratic Western style market economy terms, and that the country would continue to open up. That obviously did not materialize in recent years. Europeans, at least here in Berlin, one gets the impression that we slowly wake up to the challenges and are aware of our dependencies. And I think the coronavirus crisis helped tremendously to make these dependencies quite feasible. And the question is, of course, the comprehensive agreement on investment, not so much on the substance actually, but it was concluded just after Christmas. And people ask whether you personally think that was such a good thing in the light of Hong Kong, Xinjiang, the economic coercion in Australia, but also taking into account that the incoming Biden administration had no chance basically to coordinate with the Europeans. So was that wise timing?
The answer is yes. I think it was a wise timing. I think that part of the answer is already in the way you framed your question, in the sense that there are limits to, I would say, the way we can develop our relations with China, which are related to, first of all, to their attitude when it comes to human rights, when it comes to minorities, when it comes to Hong Kong, and so on. And that's, we are making it clear. And I mean, we have made it very clear, I think even, I don't know if today or yesterday afternoon, where we issued a statement on these new measures that have been taken in Hong Kong. But that said, I mean, we also understand, I mean, sorry, I know that I said that I will be quick, but I need to make this point. No, I need to make this point. Otherwise, we will always be in a sort of a permanent tension between how do we deal with difficult countries. The world is complex. The world is made of countries that are contradictory, that have contradictory points of view, and that. But this is it. That's what we have. We have to decide whether we do not do anything with China because there is there are human rights violations, or we sanction and we say that we do not like what they are doing in human rights, but at the same time, we try to continue working with them on another of other things which are of interest also for us. And that's the point. That's why the agreement is, I think it was the right thing to do. We have been negotiating for years about the possibility of having a more leveled playing field with China when it was coming to investments which are important for us, which are of interest for us, for our societies. So, I mean, every negotiation is a sort of moment when you can reap the maximum of the benefits. And it was honestly the best moment to do it. And I don't understand why we have to go around asking everybody if we can do it. I mean, I think that we are grown up.
Everybody, maybe the Americans, our kind of new great transatlantic partner.
Yes, but I mean, it's and it's good. I mean, the America, I mean, with all due respect, I don't want to make any kind of polemics, but they are also taking decisions without consulting us too much. I mean, now, for example, they've decided a number of things in Afghanistan. They did not consult us too much. So, I mean, we need to be also a little bit more self-confident about which are our interests and how to defend them. We have to do it with all, let's say, the maximum openness vis-a-vis our transatlantic friends, and we want to do it. But this does not mean that we cannot take decisions if we think that we have an interest in taking these decisions.
Thank you. Maybe let's briefly talk about the strategic compass, because there are numerous questions about the strategic compass. First question is, obviously member states and the EAS are working on this, and now it's the phase of the strategic dialogue. But the question is, looking at also, again, recent events and the EU budget negotiations, when basically the money for the EDF and military mobility initiative was halved. So how do you think one can make sure that this strategic compass will really make a difference and not end up as just another paper tiger, kind of a wish list of good intentions, but something that really kind of brings European security and defense policy forward, a boost? We have had so many wake-up calls in the past, and always it was said, now is the time for European security and defense. And so I just ask you, how can we make sure that now really is the time with the strategic compass?
Well, once again, I mean, we need, to put things in perspective and to, if I look at the evolution of what the European Union has done, is doing in the area of defense in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, I think that it is striking, honestly. And then for someone who is even a little bit gray-haired like I am, and remembers that in the past, when we were speaking about foreign policy, not defense issues, foreign policy issues, the Council was changing this configuration because this was not, let's say, part of the treaty. We are coming from far, and we have gone quite a long way in that direction. Now, coming to the compass, so I mean, we need to relativize a little bit this issue. Coming to the compass, I think that first of all, there is a very important element that this compass is based on a threat assessment. And this threat assessment is the first common intelligence paper which has been prepared by the European Union, by the EAS. Never before had we had this kind of broad consultation and definition of a framework within which we should act. So on the basis of this common and shared assessment, we are now deciding which are the actions that we need to take. I mean, I'm not saying that these actions are not implying budgetary resources, because they are. And when we are speaking about certainly military mobility, or when we're speaking about programs in terms of defense, this implies money. But let's be clear, it's much more how we rationalize and how we get together. I mean, creating a common industrial base, for example, does not cost money. On the contrary, it saves money for many member states. Instead of having 17 different tanks, we could go to one tank in Europe. That would save a lot of money. So it's not only a question of money. The question is starting to create the common culture that really this is there are a number of threats that we have to face together. That when we want to do operations, we need to have a mechanism which is sufficiently robust to give the possibility of really planning these operations from the European Union. And this is happening. The MPCC is part of this story. When it comes to missions, member states have to understand, and they need to also to be consistent in their determination and come up with assets and military staff or police staff. That when it comes to hybrid threats, we have a common response to the hybrid threats. And again, this is not only cyber, but it's also disinformation, which is one of the hybrid threats that we need to face. That when we are speaking about resilience, this resilience means many things, but means also, for example, the diversification of supply chains and being able not create monodependencies. So once again, it's not just a question of money, it's just a question of mental setup and understanding that when we have these kind of threats, we have to be much more, first of all, that the threats are much more sophisticated and that they imply a much larger number of instruments that we need to create. But PESCO, the common projects, again, the work that we are doing with the Commission, with the Breton and DG-DEFIS, it's all very relevant and it's part of this story. So it's not a tiger paper, it's really bringing things together.
There are two concrete questions. One from Volker Jacobi, who asks you about the link between civilian CSDP and military CSDP in the strategic compass. If the strategic compass could also be a means to bring these two angles together and of making civilian CSDP figure more prominently than it might have been in the past. That's one question. Maybe you can say a few words about this. And Sebastian Sprenger asked about the third-party participation. I think that goes beyond the strategic compass, but more broadly, during the German Council presidency, this compromise was found on PESCO, previously on the EDF. And so he asked about actually the status of the EU request specifically, because the Biden administration has taken an interest in joining the PESCO project on military mobility. And he asked specifically, so how are things going? And how satisfied are you also with third-party participations with the regulation? Is there interest beyond maybe the Biden administration? So maybe you can say a few words about civilian CSDP and third-party participation.
On the first, yes, I mean, we need to bring the element together of the civilian and military. And I think that, I don't know, we were having yesterday a meeting on Sahel. And then it's one of the areas when it is very clear that, I mean, it's not only the question of civilian and military CSDP, but also of a number of other instruments that you have to bring in line. If we want to be effective, you need to create a secure environment, and that's the important thing. But then once you have created a secure environment, you have also make it sure that the actions are actually taking place. That is not only for the sake of creating a secure environment. So we will need to work in a sort of much more comprehensive approach, and that's also the work that, I mean, if I may quote myself, that I'm trying to do in the EIS in these days, really to bring all the different elements together to work in a much more integrated fashion. On the participation of third party to PESCO, very pleased that the United States have expressed their interest to participate in the military mobility project. We are at the start of it. So, I mean, I suppose and I hope that it will work fine. We will certainly devote energies and attention to making sure that it is going to work. for us, the idea of this project has to be, how to say, we do not have to be exclusive. We want to be inclusive. That's quite. But once again, also we want to do things because otherwise we are always stuck. And I mean, if we have to go and ask everybody whether they like it until the last details, we need to be able to, let's say, to bring our political willingness into a concrete action. So we do hope that also other countries will be willing to join.
So I have a question that is on my mind for a long time now. When Commission President von der Leyen came into office, she made the geopolitical commission a big thing. That was one of her major goals. And my impression was that instead of strengthening traditional foreign policy instruments and tools and also people and EU diplomacy more broadly, she basically wanted to enforce the EU's international footprint where the EU was strongest and most competitive, focus on kind of the internal dimensions, basically on external action, trade, competition, regulation. And that brings me to basically two questions. So if you look back, how geopolitical do you think this commission has been? And what would you base your assessment on? Why has it been more geopolitical than previous commissions? First question, and since Jörg introduced you as being Team Europe, yeah, I think you have a rather good insight into this topic. And also the second question is, to what extent do you think that this ambition also expressed by Mrs. von der Leyen to be a very active figure in foreign policy, to what extent do you think there is also an unhealthy competition between Mr. Borrell, Mr. Michel, Mrs. von der Leyen? I mean, we had 3 statements on Libya when kind of new personnel started. So first of all, geopolitical, yes or no? And is there unhealthy competition?
I think that the European Union, and I don't know if this commission in general, but the European Union is certainly a geopolitical actor, and there is no doubt about that. It is a geopolitical actor, it has been a geopolitical actor, and will continue to be a geopolitical actor. I think that sometimes you need to, let's say more clearly in order to, let's say, define and make it more evident the reality. And that's maybe what President von der Leyen has done in terms of making more clear this dimension. I will come back to that because there are a number of elements which are relevant. The same goes for Team Europe. Team Europe is not something new. Team Europe is the implementation of the treaties. But one thing is to say implement the treaties. Another thing is to say Team Europe, which is much more, let's say, attractive. And it's not only that, because it gives the sense that essentially the footprint of member states is part of the story. It's not, let's say, they do not, it's much better Team Europe than the EU and its member states. It expresses we are in a world where communication is essential, and this is a good communication and a good way of selling the idea. So I don't think that I'll say we have reinvented the wheel, but the way we are expressing this new reality is relevant. Concerning the what you say, the footprint, internal dimension, so I was saying before, and I can be more explicit even now, there are many ways of doing foreign policy now, and foreign policy not just done by foreign ministries. Let's be clear, this is true in Brussels, and that is true also in our capitals. When the European Union, when the Commission, honestly, I mean not European, the Commission has issued its first bonds and is financed itself on the market to finance this is a very strong foreign policy act. It's not something, let's say, minor. It's, I would say, as relevant as creating an army. So, I mean, we have to be aware when we are doing the Green Deal and we are, say, making this an overarching policy. It has certainly an internal element, an internal component, because it's a new model of production, but it's also foreign policy initiative. So I think that I would say this is something that we need to put on the balance, because this is also our strength. If we measure our strength in foreign policy, also if we are able or not to solve the crisis in Syria, then we are doomed to fail. Because, sorry, nobody's solving the crisis in Syria. It's not the European Union, neither the United States, nor Russia. Nobody's solving this crisis. So why are we, and that our foreign policy not working while we are unable to do things that also others are unable to do? But we are doing many other things which are right. And I think that the idea of putting this in value, it's a very important point. So to me, this is not, sorry, this is not at all a competition. On the contrary, this is complementarity. We are all, let's say, working in the same direction. We all want this European, this European dimension being evident. And this is a house which has many rooms. I mean, we have, and there is room sometimes communicate, sometimes they communicate better, sometimes they communicate less good, but this does not mean that we are under the same house. So, sorry, I don't believe, not even in the story of the competition. I mean, there is no competition. I mean, there are different levels and different responsibilities. The High Representative has his responsibility in foreign policy. The President of the Commission has her responsibility in foreign policy. The President of the Council has his responsibility in foreign policy. And the 27 member states have their responsibility in foreign policy. And I mean, and in member states too, there is a sort of always a little bit of tension between foreign ministers, prime ministers, defense ministries, intelligence communities. It's part of the way, then you put all these elements together and you do something that is visible, that is strong, and that has an impact.
Okay, we have 8 minutes left and still some questions. Eckhard Brose, who heads the German Federal Academy for Security Policy, who is its president, basically asked a question about the problems with European decision-making. So one of the big problems, of course, is the unanimity principle. And since, although the Germans would love to overcome this obstacle, this is not in sight. He asked whether there would be ways, constructive ways of engaging smaller groups of EU member states, I think within the EU framework, to spearhead or catalyze a more effective EU foreign policy. So, and maybe I extend this question, if we don't get QMV anytime soon, what other possibilities do you see for us to make EU foreign policy more agile and capable of action?
Look,
it's a big one.
no, I mean, it's a big one. It's the QMB is a sort of totem. I mean, we are going around it, and certainly, I mean, without QMB, we would be much more, which would be faster in our process and maybe even more effective. But it has to be clear that it's a decision that member states have to take themselves. And they have to feel comfortable with this decision. When member states decided to have majority voting in trade issues, it was an important decision with a lot of consequences from a certain point of view. But they took it, and they took also ownership of this process. What is difficult to imagine is to have a situation whereby we proceed against the will of some member states. So we will need to continue.
Constructive thinking.
Well, there are several ways. I mean, constructively, you can have, for example, constructive abstention. You can have consensus. You don't need to have unanimity necessarily. You can, how to say, as we are doing, for example, in a number of issues now, for example, with, I don't want to quote countries or issues, but there are countries that when there is a specific issue, they accept, but they make a sort of a national declaration where they specify their position and the fact that they, in a way, are not 100% comfortable with that. It's a constructive way of proceeding. Certainly, when this becomes a sort of hindrance for having, let's say, a position of the Union, that's a pity, to be very honest. And it's, I would say, this is showing somehow the limit of this preoccupation. I think that we should come to a point where I'm trying to, let's say, also in my context, to say, if there is a really vital interest for the security of your country, I mean, in a way, the European Union will never overstep. But if there are, let's say, political sensitivities, but which are not endangering the security of the state and of the country, then, I mean, using the veto power, it's a little bit going beyond what should be done.
And do you think, coming back to Mr. Brose's question, it would be a solution maybe to work more with special envoys or groups of countries that become the advocates for the EU on a specific portfolio, like you have done with Libya, I think?
We can do a number, and it's something that we are working on it. I mean, to have, for example, using much more in a much more structured way, foreign ministers, for example, in order to do specific things in the name of the European Union. It's been a very, I think, positive experience that we have had very recently with the Finnish Foreign Minister Haavisto working on Ethiopia, like I don't know, the Portuguese Foreign Minister on Cabo Verde. I mean, so it's there are a number of elements that we can use to facilitate this process. I'm not against the idea of having smaller groups. I think that somehow, if this can facilitate to bring together the consensus, what it is important for me is that this then goes into the overall process, and that feeds a sense of ownership by everybody for specific issues. That's the important thing.
There are so many questions still left that we definitely need to schedule another session with you to answer all of them, but I would like to ask one last. So at the end of Mr. Borrell's term, if it were up to you, what do you think should be the 3 major achievements?
Look, I mean, I will, I don't know if I managed to get to 3, but let me say 1, which and it will be more on, I would say, on approach than on specific policies. And then in terms of approach, I would like to have a much more integrated vision of what the European Union can do abroad. I would like to really have an alignment, much better alignment of the instrument in order to be more effective, to have a greater impact on the decisions that we are making and on in the situation in which we are getting it. If by the end of the mandate we can really, how to say, fulfill the mandate which was given to the High Representative and to the EIS in the decision establishing the service, I think that we would have done a good service to Europe and a good service to our citizens.
Thank you very much. I have not asked questions on the Eastern Mediterranean, on the Green Deal, on the role of the Parliament in EU foreign policy, on, I quote, Borrell's boy group and gender equality. So just to give you an idea how many questions there were.
I'll take 1 minute to pick up one of those that you have now mentioned, because it's very close to my heart. And it's something that has a sort of a constant feeling. It's generating me a lot of uneasiness. It's the boys' club. Mm-hmm. If there is a someone who is not really a typical boys' club, it's me. For my story and for my own way of being. So, I mean, I feel a little bit, how to say, uncomfortable when I'm feeling attacked of being a sort of southern machist. because it's really
a nice wrap-up of comments in the chat. Yeah,
it's really something that is so distant from my feelings and from my way of being and from my own existence that I have a little bit of this is something on which, since the start of my mandate, I'm working very closely. I mean, it's now, for example, one of the things that, because Mara Marinakis has gone, I mean, the world is collapsing. I've just appointed a gender advisor. She's a fantastic Dutch colleague with an incredible background, 3 times ambassador, very good in communication, and I'm sure that she will do a fantastic job. But even before appointing her, there was a sort of style that I wanted to kill this, that I did not want to do anything on gender, that I wanted to avoid working on women, peace and security, and so on. We have issued an action plan on the 8th of March with a number of concrete actions to see how we can support in a very concrete way women at work, women to go in delegations. I understand that the point of advocacy is important, that the point of mainstreaming is important, but working on the conditions for this to happen, I think it's also very relevant. And I would like a little bit more of this. We have just appointed, the High Representative has appointed in this boys club a Deputy Secretary General who is a very good colleague coming from a commission, a Swedish lady. So it's nothing to do with boys and with the South, and even younger than us. Can you imagine?
This is nice. This is nice to hear that this is dear to your heart. This is also from a personal level. That's
we are looking
really nice
for more women managers. We have to. If everything goes okay, we will have a very good round of appointment of female ambassadors in the next set. I would like to be judged on facts and not on prejudices, to be honest.
When we talk to you next time, certainly before the end of your term, we will judge you by your deeds. I promise that already. I now thank you very much on behalf of
and don't believe that only women can defend women.
No. But I would like to thank you very much on behalf of Jörg Wojan and the European Commission here in Berlin, but also really also from ECFR. You are a very dear council member, and we value your continuous engagement with us. So thanks very much. And also on behalf of all the listeners and people who ask questions, thank you for your time and your patience, and for also taking the tough questions.
Thank you very much, and happy to repeat when you want.
Very good news.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Yes, Stefano.